and start to look at real incomes. And of course, we've had a president over the last 6 years who has reduced taxes immensely. The last tax reform, which he signed about 6 months ago, when you looked carefully at the numbers, it gave something like $20 to people at the median income in terms of tax relief, and something like $9,000 each to the wealthiest. This was not confined to the United States. I noticed, since I like to keep tracks on the wealthiest families in the world, that in 1988, nobody from Mexico was recorded as being on the wealthiest list of families in the world. But by the time you get to 1996, 24 Mexicans are on that list. And one of them, Carlos Slim, last year, was estimated to be the third wealthiest person in the world. If you look at what happened in what was the Soviet Union, in Russia, by the time you get to 1995, 7 oligarchs control about half of the economy. If you look at the figures for Britain, similar concentrations of wealth. If you look at China, the data is extremely difficult to get in China. But I was passed an official report that was actually published by the Chinese and then 2 weeks later was withdrawn. And from one of my colleagues, I got a translation. And what that showed was that even officially in China, there is considerable concentration of wealth going on. And if you go to China, you'll find some of the most affluent, wonderful golf courses in the world, gated communities, people purchasing cars that cost $1 million. Somebody in China is getting extremely rich in a situation where the mass of the people are working at almost no wage rate at all. So when you start to look at these concentrations of wealth, and I emphasize again that it's not the top 10%, it's not even the top 1%, it's the top 0.01% where you're seeing these immense concentrations. And these immense concentrations occur in certain sectors of the economy, retailing, finance, and so on. Because what you find is that there are manipulations going on in the financial realm through which people are extracting immense wealth. For instance, we have in the United States, and indeed around the world, growth of something called hedge funds, private partnership accounts. And the managers of the hedge funds usually take home in their own pocket about 20% of what it is they make in a year. Last year, the top 25 hedge funds in the United States, the people who managed them each took home on average $250 million in 1 year. Now, hedge funds are risky, so before you all go off and decide to become a hedge fund manager, you should know that one of them lost $6 billion in 6 weeks earlier this year, so it's risk. But when you ask yourself the question, who is it that works so hard that they deserve $250 million in a year for what they do? And what is it they're doing? They're playing with fictitious money.
And actually, if you start to look at the way markets are structured, when you look at currency swaps and you look at derivatives, and the whole set of new financial markets have been constructed since 1990. And these financial markets, in terms of the assets circulating in these financial markets, moved from zero in 1990 to a figure that is now 10 times the gross domestic product of the United States, Europe, Japan, all the OECD countries combined. What is that money about? What is it doing? And how come people are extracting such immense wealth from pushing that money around? You then also see, particularly in the United States, that of course we have things called elections. We have something called a democracy. But it is so clearly a democracy of money. Money buys elections. And the reason that Republicans are not very different from Democrats is because both of them are subject to that money power. And that money power is also to political decision making. So when you ask the question, why all these tax breaks for the rich, it has a lot to do with the fact that the rich control political power. I don't know how many of you saw Michael Moore's film, Fahrenheit 9/11. There's a wonderful moment there where Bush is talking to an audience and he says, some people call you the have-mores. These were the really, really rich contributors to his campaign. He said, I call you my political base. All you need in the United States to win elections is a political base of maybe 500 important people. That's all you need. And this is called democracy. Now, I was very interested about this concentration of class power. And, of course, in the United States, it's very difficult even to use the word class. People in the United States like to believe they live in a classless society. The only media that uses the term class war is the Wall Street Journal and the right, and they use it as a term to mock whatever you are saying. So to talk class war or to talk class politics is actually extremely difficult. But it seemed to me very important to try to do it. Because one of the things I do every year is I teach a course on Marx's Capital, Volume 1. And it's a very interesting book, fascinating piece of literature, wonderful book to read. I now teach it in the shadow of the Empire State Building. And every year now I get over 100 students, graduate students, in the course. I feel the revolution has finally arrived. But the interesting thing about this book is that it tries to do two things. It tries to describe an actually working capitalist society, mainly, of course, Britain in the 19th century. But it also does something else, is it tries to write a critique of classical political economy, a critique of liberal theory, and particularly the work of Adam Smith and Ricardo. And what Marx does is to say they have certain proposals about how the world should be. I'm going to imagine a world in which their proposals are true and have come to be. And then I'm going to say, what kind of world would it actually look like?